you've got conditioning, you've got strength, but there is this CrossFit responder where someone is just really good. And so rather than this, as I just said, rather than this formalized testing where we have like constant checkpoints for the athletes to make sure that they're slightly progressing each day moving forward.
There are genes, for example, like myostatin, that if you knock that one out naturally or even via CRISPR-Cas in cows, their muscle growth doesn't stop, basically. Let's jump right into it. So I get a question related to coaching. So you have been coaching for more than a decade, and not only regular Joes and Janes in CrossFit, but also elite, top-notch CrossFit athletes. And for you, what would be, let's say, the biggest difference in terms of coaching between coaching a regular person and more of an elite athlete?
So it's quite a broad question,
of course,
and it can go in like two directions. So one of the things that obviously there is a difference in the elites in some aspect, but I always remember this is years ago I heard this, and it was talking about kind of how you can improve someone going from 0 to improving their 100-meter time.
Yeah.
In essence, for a beginner, you can kind of make them walk, you can make them do long runs, but just anything related to that activity that they weren't doing before is kind of going to have some transfer into them getting better.
Yeah.
Whereas, you take an Olympic athlete who's a 100-meter sprinter, and your goal is to make them better, obviously then you can't just have them walk, you can't have them do long runs, and the transferability of all of those things is going to get a lot more narrow.
Yeah.
But I think that when doing it well, the principles apply all the way through from beginner to elite.
Okay.
The big difference you start to see is that those slight subtle tweaks in the elite athletes become a lot more important. For the everyday athlete, it's the most important thing I would argue is consistency. Like, can you get into the gym? Are you enjoying it? And then you'll see those improvements. Mm-hmm. I'd also argue that, there are technical things to help them move more efficiently, to get them better. But this is always the thing that attracted me to working with the elite athletes in the first place, is that these small tweaks that you make really make a noticeable difference.
You mean you have actually an independent influence as being a coach, related to maybe a normal everyday CrossFitter? He jumps into every CrossFit box, he will get better. That's kind of what you mean? Yeah,
exactly. You really see that it's great to see people get better. When we had our affiliate, for example, we really saw, just the everyday person came in, and it was that the person who came in every day, just did the hour class, the changes that they would make over years was just incredible. Like, people lost so much weight, they got healthier. Whereas in the elite athletes, if they're not executing their bar muscle up in a certain way, we just start going into this really minute detail. Yeah. I do remember there was a bit of a changing point for me after Sara podiumed in 2015.
Yep.
She podiumed, so there are only 2 places to get her to first. And so what are those small differences that we can make? There's kind of this aspect of sprinting, there's the gymnast aspect, there's improving the conditioning, and you really start honing in of how you can take this person who's already really good and make them better. So I think that those principles apply to the beginner, but the relevance to the elite athlete becomes a lot more relevant.
Yeah, makes complete sense. So what I also see in my own experience, there are, for example, everyday CrossFitters, right? That now that the sport is already lasting, let's say 15 years at least, you have people who have been doing CrossFit regularly for 6-7 years, right? But still are not the elite athletes. And you see these people actually hitting a plateau. That's kind of what I mean. So they come in, they have the consistency, as you just mentioned, but they still are very marginally getting better. It obviously is very individual, but would you have some kind of ideas how those people, because I think there's more and more of those people actually, can still improve? Should they just keep following a regular CrossFit 5 times a week, like schedule, or should they try to be more individual, or should they search a coach, or how do you see that?
So I think the variance is really important, and that's the one thing that we have in abundance in CrossFit is this variance. You know, we're always doing something new, something different. And I think when you're asking that question of someone who's been doing, say, class programming for 6 years and they want to just improve, so it's like you've got to reflect a little bit on that journey and be like, okay, what's my biggest limiting factor? Am I struggling because of movement? Then actually you might need to take a step back and be like, how do I improve my movement efficiency to get better? I think this is something that's overlooked so much, is that movement efficiency really matters. And if you're not moving well, you're wasting energy, this kind of free energy. Like an example for people out there, someone doing double unders. If someone's not holding good technique in double unders, they're jumping high, really using their shoulders, for them to do 100 reps, it's going to cost so much more energy than someone who's jumping lower and just using their wrists to get the rope moving. And that applies through every movement you will see in CrossFit, through Olympic weightlifting, through pull-ups, or whatever it may be. So I think the first question to ask yourself, are you moving well? If you're not moving well, then you've really got to look at that and start there. Then you go into some of the more specifics. That might be, I might be a bit of a, like me, for example, I feel I naturally respond quite well to conditioning. My conditioning can kind of get to a good point quite quickly. Whereas my strength is the constant struggle. Yep. And so if I want to improve my strength, I know, okay, actually I might spend a bit of time. Actually, my volume might get slightly less. And I might start, adding in some plyometrics, doing more speed work, and spending a good amount of time just through a session building up to the heavier weights for me. So they do you can start kind of playing the dials a little bit after you have that length of experience, but it needs you to reflect with your coach at the gym and really go look at which aspect am I struggling with and how can I kind of turn up that dial to improve it to the other levels.
Yeah, what you said about movement efficiency is very, very interesting, because I have to say, so in the beginning when I stepped into CrossFit and as an exercise scientist, I looked everything from a pure physiological point of view. How strong you are, and also most importantly how your times or your movement efficiencies on the ergs and on the bikes, right? But now I've been digging into a little bit of biomechanics, and for example, just I've done the calculation yesterday, spent some time on it. If you would do a wall ball, right, and you would squat until above parallel, let's say 130 degrees knee angle, all right? So your displacement of your center of gravity is, let's say, depends of course how tall a person is, 35 centimeters, or let's say 45 centimeters, right? But then you would do the same movement and you would squat all the way down to below 90 degrees, so below parallel. You would spend approximately, if you would have 10% more displacement of center of gravity, you would spend 18.8% more energy for one rep. That's crazy. So with a wall ball of 20 and an average person, depends a little bit on those, so a couple of factors, but it's above 10%, right?
That's crazy. And this is the thing, it's like mind-blowing crazy, and you actually see it. So it's hard. This is, I think, the reason in CrossFit it's really hard to pick out sometimes, because you have so many movements happening in a workout. People may be feeling gas, they're limited by that conditioning capacity, or they may be limited by the strength. But actually, when you start to break it down and really dive into the workouts, you can spot these things. And we had a coaches meeting yesterday, actually. One of the things we were going through, I can send you the link. I think it's fascinating to watch. There was a games workout where they put the gymnastic bar. They had 4 gymnastic bars, and you had to do a single rep on each gymnastic bar.
Fat bar, right? Was that one the thick bar?
I can't remember if it was thick or not, but it was kind of a weird setup because only one rep, which is very unusual.
Yeah.
But then you went into clean. So I'll send the link through. It's the reason it's interesting to watch is because Alex Smith's there, obviously ex-gymnast, but 4 bar muscle ups, like without question, it's nothing to do with conditioning, nothing to do with fatigue. It's just everyone can do 4 reps. But what you'll see is that Alex Smith arrives to the bar like 1 rep ahead of everyone else on those bar muscle ups, like 20-25% quicker than the rest of the field over 4 bar muscle ups. And so then you can start extrapolating that through different movements. You see it through double unders. We did like a really interesting test actually when we were in Switzerland. There was a girl called Sara, Swiss athlete, who used to be like national champion of jump rope. And we put her next to Jan Matiaska, just 100 double unders. Both went unbroken, both did 100. Jan looks pretty good. But Sara was like significantly better. And they both, I would say, it's just because she moved better. And there's no other, it's just she moves better and therefore is better. It's like, and I think this has got lost somewhere along the line. Like you just look for strength, just look for conditioning.
This just got so lost in just the whole, And there, indeed, you have to dial back. Maybe if to tape yourself or get someone who knows a little bit about it, and it's all about movement efficiency. Super interesting, obviously, and you can shave off a lot of reps and a lot of time by just moving well.
I would say this. I mean, this is going slightly off topic, but this is one of the troubles in some ways with the games, because new movements get introduced, like new movement. And so we don't really get the opportunity to like really dive in and refine some of these CrossFit things. If movements stayed the same for say 5 years, athletes would really start improving on them because they know their capacities. Like when you listen to runners or triathletes speak, like the depth that they go into on say it's always blown my mind, like transitions for triathletes are just huge. And then you think about transitions in CrossFit and how much in depth you could start moving into. But now we've got crossovers, pullovers, all of these different things. It can kind of get a bit lost just seeking perfection in some of these basic movements.
Makes complete sense. It's definitely super interesting. In at least in exercise physiology, we talk a lot about. And that's also why CrossFit, I think, is interesting from a more physiological point of view, about the interference effect, meaning that endurance and strength, if you would do them in one session, they would interfere. And athletes want to avoid this as much as possible, certainly CrossFit athletes, although they are the ultimate interference athletes. In your elite programming, do you think about this, or do you embrace it? Do you try to separate the sessions, or how do you see this?
Yeah, we very much embrace it. So our sport is CrossFit.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the time people get really lost in all these different directions. They get lost in this testing, they get lost on this linear progression, they get lost on whatever it may be. But ultimately our sport is CrossFit. And that is a combination of strength, conditioning, coupled in these different ways. So if you're not testing that and you're not experimenting with that or training in that realm, then you're not really doing your sport.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the further you move away from doing our sport, the further you're moving away from achieving. Well, probably not, because you've moved away from the sport to improve your conditioning, but how much transfer does that conditioning have to the sport of CrossFit?
Yeah.
So I think that this, like, not losing sight of what we're trying to achieve is really important. And so I think this idea of compartmentalizing it too much really just moves you further away from the essence of it.
Yeah, it's super interesting, obviously, to hear it from a coach with so much experience as you. Obviously, from a more theoretical point of view, you would argue the other thing, right? But it doesn't mean it's correct, because these papers, these sciences are all done not in CrossFit athletes. That's a little bit the shame. They're done in cyclists, or let's say regular people who. Or they do endurance, or they do strength, or they do both. Yeah, obviously, if you do both in a normal person, he or she won't improve their strength as much as if they would only do strength, right? But the end goal, that's not very interesting end goal. I think in CrossFit, it's a more interesting end goal, which is CrossFit, which is the concurrent training, which is the 5K row or 5K run, and then 20 minutes later, CrossFit total. That is the goal of the sport, right? And yeah.
And I think there's some interesting aspects around that. A lot of, some people try and, I don't like the word periodize because I think it gets very generalized, but you kind of break down the season into, okay, I'm going to do my off season, I'm going to work on my strength. Then I'm going to build my conditioning up, then I'm going to go into sport specific training.
Yeah.
And I think, we looked at it in this kind of micro view of the session. You've got this separate, I'm just going to do strength in my morning session, conditioning my afternoon, whatever it may be. But people also do that across the season. They go, okay, I'm going to, first half of the season, I'm going to build my strength. Second half season or whatever, third, whatever it may be, I'm going to build my conditioning. Then I'm just going to magically hope they fit together for this cross component. I'm going to maintain this strength, I'm going to maintain this conditioning, and I'm going to be a better CrossFit athlete. I just don't think the reality, we are like complex beings. And that complex nature means that, you can't apply these linear solutions all the time to us being like these complex entities.
Yeah.
And I think there's really interesting examples of this. You've got like Adam Klink, for example. There's a couple who've done it now. They have this 500 pounds back squat and sub 5 minute mile run.
Yeah.
Like, how is that guy not winning the games with those? If we kind of separate these extremes, I mean, you could argue CrossFit's like a squatting dominant sport in terms of strength. Okay, 500-pound back squat, like strong enough, like really strong. The running component, they don't even do it on machines. They're running, so they're moving their body weight through space, which is harder for a lot of those bigger guys, and running sub 5 minute miles. And Adam Klink has great gymnastics, or good enough gymnastics as well. But this element of putting it together is kind of missing.
Yeah.
And you see this, I know athletes who are strong, well conditioned, and good at gymnastics, but they're not great at CrossFit. And so there's this element of CrossFit, the element of our sport where you need to be able to put it together.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the magic, and that is also from a physiology, even by chemistry point of view, we don't even really fully understand why this is happening, what you just said, right? Like if basic exercise science, it's easy. You just have a cyclist and he does cycling and you put him on a ramp test, and if he has a high VO2 and also can as a very high threshold, 95% certain he will do well in competitions, right? But in CrossFit, it's just not like that, because we talked about this also with our previous podcast with Evan. We actually see pretty low VO2 maxes or peaks in elite CrossFit athletes. I'm talking about semi-finalist and games athletes, 55 to maybe 60 some, right? It's like, I would have never have guessed this in my life. But they have the same VO2 max than me, for example. I've tested this, I had 60. But if we do an open workout, which is typical CrossFit, right? They do double the amount of reps than me, double. In a certain time frame. So they can produce, maybe it's not that straightforward because they move more efficient, but at least they can almost produce double the amount of energy per time unit than me, while I have the same VO2 max or close. So there's many more things that are super interesting. And I think much of those are also related to the local oxygenation of the muscle, which we now can look into with wearables, for example, where there are differences and that you just cannot see by performance or heart rate, for example. So maybe to look into this, do you use any wearables? Do you use more new technology, or are you looking into it to guide your training?
So I think that we've always steered away from heart rate monitors, lactates. I mean, as you know, you've been over to Mallorca, you've tested Jacqueline, you tested a lot of the athletes that we've worked with, and I enjoy the data. But as up to this moment, we've not really delved into the realm, of going through all that testing, because for us, it's like, how do we see the relevance of that testing? How do we use that data that we generated?
It's all about usage. How can you use it?
Exactly. But I think one thing that's interesting, like Train Red, for example, they've just sent us some sensors. And for us, it's a little bit interesting because we get this real-time data.
That's more interesting.
So, and we talked about movement efficiency. So let's go, let's say we change a technique with an athlete. Does that then have a direct impact that we can then see?
Yeah, that's
So we start, yeah. So we get this real-time feedback with these wearables, and heart rate, lactate for us, like it just doesn't have that relevance. It's just, it's like where's the relevance of this? I mean, someone might maintain with a higher heart rate and finish the workout first, or someone might maintain it low. It's just there's so much variable in this, and also when CrossFit athletes, it's just like, whatever, they have to do something that gets their heart rate really high, then it drops down, and then it goes up again. It's just like all over the place. So it's just the data.
How I see heart rate as well as lactate, actually, it's a systemic effect of exercise, right? So lactate is obviously produced by the muscles and oxidized by the liver and by the non-working muscles, or at least not high intensity working muscles. So it's an equilibrium. It's something that is in the blood and that you measure. Obviously, it's coming from the muscles, and that's it. Same a little bit with heart rate. It doesn't show the local muscle fatigue. That is extremely important in CrossFit, obviously, right? So if you would put someone on a rower, a big person, 100-kilogram CrossFit athlete, there's a good chance that due to his poor rowing technique, he's actually going to fail in the biceps and therefore have to, for example, stop a test, compared to a good endurance runner who will or rower who will actually fail in the quads or somewhere in the lower body. And if you would take lactate with those two athletes, you would know basically nothing. You would know lactate goes up and the person, whatever, it has this, you see? Or you can assess the threshold of that person, nice, but you don't know the threshold of each individual muscle, or at least muscle group. And now with these new technologies, which is really at the start, and certainly in the CrossFit world, we can, I think, know a lot more and a lot better things, because you can continuously monitor this throughout the whole season. Indeed, there's many cool applications which you just explained as well. Yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah, so I think as that world advances, and I think you need these, obviously these companies have to invest a lot of money, and so it's kind of like actually I'm a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like Whoop, for example, they have to start generating money to show their product works, and with that money they can then reinvest and get better. So it's like as the generations improve, the technology improves, and then actually becomes more useful for us. And as we said at the start of the conversation, it's like for the elite athletes, these minute things can matter when the data is relevant.
Yeah, 100%. So, you do individualize slightly, I guess, the programming of your athletes. Is this mostly based on, let's say, weaknesses? As you say, some people are naturally strong or more endurance type. Or do you have for your elite group kind of a general training program?
So all our athletes who are semi-final level and above all get one-to-one. And this is a little of the evolution of the sports. So, back in the day, it was like me trying to work with all of these athletes.
Yeah.
But as the sports progressed and we've progressed with it now, there's like kind of a one-to-one ratio of an athlete working with a coach.
Okay.
So it does become a bit more personalized. And how it gets personalized is it really does depend on this athlete, because they do start to respond a little bit differently. And a lot of these athletes now are not working, they're training full time. So it's like you really can have an impact if you're giving them too much volume and they're not responding well to it. You can reduce that volume. As you say, like we know in CrossFit, especially with strength, and this is like a really interesting point, like we have so much data regarding strength. And I think the sport got really biased towards stronger athletes. It's just the fashion of the sport became you need to be stronger. And so we know a lot about strength, and we know that you just need to be able to hit this baseline. We look at it like a bit of a bell curve.
Yeah.
It's like if you're on the top of that bell or the other side, it's a really high risk when strength events come up, because there are so many strong people in the sport. So we need to make sure that athlete is the good side of the bell curve rather than that. bad side. So that might be, for example, if an athlete's not there, that's going to be like high priority for us. If they want to make it to semis or make it to games, they need to be past that curve. Conditioning becomes a bit more interesting because, you know, it's very rare that we have like a pure conditioning test in CrossFit, like, you know, 2K row, 5K row. We've seen it, but often coupled with things, never in itself. And so actually our conditioning often has like lots of different, it's like kind of got some gymnastic component, it's got this movement efficiency component. So there's lots of other things within a conditioning that we need to look at and try and make sure they're at a certain baseline. We have certain measurements that we'll use to make sure they're there or test. But ultimately, you know, the test is the test type thing. It's like a bit of a cliche saying, but, you know, when the open rocks around and Castro decides to put in whatever he wants to put in, you know, that is the test that we are preparing for.
That's the most important test. So you don't really have a monthly test that you pick for your athletes to see where they're at. You really do it one-to-one rather, or do you have like specific tests to see how it goes?
So I actually like to think that we have like for our elite athletes like 2 check-ins each day, in the sense that we know, okay, we've got a back squat that day. Let's say they're building up to technical lift. We're going to build to a technical heavy of some snatch complex, be it like, you know, snatch, hang snatch, overhead squat. We're actually going to know, like, that's useful data for us because we'll know that athletes 1RM. We know that, you know, on Wednesday after 2 more days of training, that they managed to get within, you know, say they managed to get within 90% of their 1RM. We're like, okay, actually, you're doing pretty well, especially with that fatigue.
Yep.
The chances are that the 1RM is going to be slightly higher than we've had. Yep. You know, and say in the afternoon session, say they just had handstand push-ups and their time's like way off of where it typically should be, we can then start to improve that pressing. So it's like we just don't have formal tests because the relevance of the data is not that useful. What we really need is the experience of the coaches to be like, okay, there is transfer. Like the handstand push-up time in this workout was the relevant part of that workout and it's starting to go down. Actually, this is kind of maybe like a bit of an orange or red flag where we're like, okay, pressing strength, we need to start looking at maybe adding tests to see where that is. And so rather than this, as I just said, rather than this formalized testing, we have like constant checkpoints for the athletes to make sure that they're slightly progressing each day moving forward.
Yeah, makes complete sense, certainly at that level. I mean, we have done a post about this not so long ago on the wod-science page. And one of the things that was interesting, if you look at the data from elite CrossFit athletes that made it to the games, the ones who won, so I don't know exactly the date anymore, of the last decade, of all the podium finishers on the men's side, so 30 people, right? 18 of them finished within the top 5 in their rookie season, meaning that they kind of like a rocket came to the scene and then kind of stayed there, most of those people. So what that infers to me from a more physiological point of view is that it seems, at least certainly when the sport was a bit younger, that people got to the top actually very quickly, a couple of years. So from almost doing nothing, no CrossFit training, baby training, no CrossFit training, to getting it to literally games level. That was like let's say a 5-year process for many athletes. Now it's longer, I know. But that seems to me that that elite games athletes, they must have an amazing trainability. That's kind of my point. So that they do something and they just respond super hard to the training. Do you also feel that and that might be a difference between a bubble athlete and a games athlete, that you would give them the same amount of training and the games athlete just responds better, gets better at it? Or is it maybe too far-fetched?
No, I don't think it's far-fetched. And I you know, it's one of those phenomenons that people who are high responders and like coaches in normal classes will have seen this as well. Like some people are just really good. And, you know, it can be frustrating for the person who's been in the class for like, you know, 5 years. And all of a sudden this person comes in, like they haven't done anything before. And then all of a sudden they're like beating them in workouts, they're getting stronger. And so I think that there is this, you've got conditioning, you've got strength, but there is this CrossFit responder where someone is just really good. And, we talk talk about training age of people like, Mal O'Brien, Emma Lawson, Emma Kerry. These people don't really have a huge training age. Okay, they might have started when they're a little younger, but 17 years old, they're competing with the best in the world. It's like it's not being trained in the sense of, developed for someone who's 27 and had to work through that process. That's like this, kind of natural ability that this person has that's being expressed in CrossFit. So like that talent aspect is crucial.
Yeah.
And
it's almost inexplicable, right? It's not that's it that you need to have. It's just you just respond to a certain stimulus. You just get cardiovascularly or just neuromuscularly stronger, and it just goes quicker. And also from a scientific perspective, it obviously has to do with genes, but it's not that science all of a sudden has found which genes are important here, right? It's not that we have the clusters of genes. I mean, we have some ideas. There are some genes that we know are correlated to athletic performance and also, by the way, to longevity. But I mean, it's not that all of a sudden we know everything and you could target those genes to make superhumans. We are not there yet at all, right? It's obviously exciting. And it always has interested me, the bell curve of responders to exercise. It's you also have the other ones, right? That train for 1 year and gain 1% muscle mass. So it's how nature works, I guess.
Speaking of genes, like when they did the Human Genome Project, they were like, okay, once we've uncovered this, we're going to have the cure to everything. We're just going to understand everything. We'll be able to cure cancer, diabetes, all of these things. Yeah. But the reality just wasn't there. And I think it really comes back to embracing that we are complex beings.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit of the training philosophy when you try and compartmentalize people and go like, okay, we're going to improve your conditioning, we're going to improve your strength. It loses sight of this complex nature of us being humans. When you listen to the stories of Fraser and how, like, he'd go into like the first open workout and feel unfit, because he hadn't trained in 3 months or whatever, and then just go in and like destroy the games. It's great. Like Tia would take like time off to do her bobsled season and come back in a phenomenal way. I mean, forget the bobsled season. She had like a baby 5 months later. She's back at Rogue, like destroying it. And so these people are crazy high responders, and that's why it's so impressive to work with athletes like that, because and a lot of the time these people will handle volume.
Yeah,
like some of the athletes, even so with the experience, like we obviously managing athlete volume is crucial for us. But when you get to work with some of the best athletes in the world, like they would handle whatever you throw at them. Like their tolerance for volume. And I think this is where you need to kind of be careful as a coach and have that experience, because honestly, you could throw like 5 sessions a day, like high run, heavy lift, high run. You do that 7 days a week, and they'll still be responding at the end of the 7 days because they just respond to it.
Yeah.
I think probably one of the most underrated athletes of the CrossFit's world is Sam Briggs.
Yeah.
And she is phenomenal. And I remember after she was in the same gym where we were training, CrossFit Costa Mesa.
Okay.
And the 2015 games were like just carnage because they did the Murph outside.
Yeah.
So they had the weight vest Murph. And I remember like in the warm-up area waiting, and like, athletes were being stretched in. There are weight vests everywhere, people hanging off. I mean, it did look like people were coming back from war. It's just brutal. And that was like at the start of the weekend. So those athletes coming back dying. Sam Briggs obviously did like super well that year, finishing 4th. And like 2 days later or a day later, we were back in Costa Mesa, and like the other athletes were just done. Sam Briggs was doing hardcore assault bike sprints like 2 days after the games. And it's just, it's just phenomenal, the tolerance that these guys have to follow. And I'm sure you'd see this in other aspects, like, you know, when you go into like Marines and Special Forces.
Yeah.
I just imagine there are guys that just get by without sleep. You know, they just don't sleep for days, and they're still able to respond really well to certain stimulus.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. There's now a Belgian television program, and they actually let regular people go through the special force, the special forces, the recruitment process, and how they do the tests. So you can see the physical tests they have to endure. And yeah, it's also a combination of kind of CrossFit with a lot of or with a very little amount of sleep. And now they're in the second season, and you see that if people know what will happen to them, they can prepare. And now you have 15 people who they prepared, and they can actually get through those tests pretty comfortably, just because they trained for it, and they're probably good responders. They're normal human beings that just do whatever, teachers and so on. So you see that the human body is capable of really crazy stuff. And I think CrossFit has shifted the bar for sure in the exercise sciences, in the field of exercise science, for sure, because we thought this would never be possible based on the studies we have done in elite weightlifters and endurance athletes, but never together. And that's why it's interesting in my view. Yeah. Maybe to shift gears a little bit, I don't know if you were happy to talk about this. You have been quite vocal about the CrossFit season, right? How it could potentially be improved with some kind of point system, and to make it more as a season, to give more importance to other competitions outside those pure from CrossFit HQ. Could you maybe elaborate on this? Do you still have those views, or do you think it can be improved here and there?
Yeah, so I still believe that our season, the CrossFit season, can be improved. And, you know, the point is this, that right now, what's happening in the CrossFit space? Basically nothing. I mean, people are kind of waiting for the Open, and they'll wait for quarterfinals. Then all of a sudden, it'll be like, boom, however many are 8 semi-finals all over 3 weekends, then a 2-month gap, and then the games.
Yep.
And, you know, as fan, I'm a big fan of the sport of CrossFit as well, and so I like to be able to follow what's happening, see the athletes competing. You know, even if I might not be directly working with any of the athletes, like watching Rogue, Tia versus Laura Rogue, it's probably the most exciting thing that's happened in the sport for a long time.
Yep.
And, you know, it's not like this is some crazy new model
No.
that's just all of it. It's just like what every successful sporting event does. And I believe that CrossFit has the capability to turn itself into a great sport. And this is one thing that really separates CrossFit from all of the other training methodologies, you know, from Les Mills or from Orange Theory or from whatever it may be. You do have this sports from F45 that I think really motivates people to join affiliates. And the point being is that you need more touch points throughout the year of an official season, so people can follow.
Yeah.
And there are certain nuances to this season that are kind of, I think, irrelevant to the big picture, or irrelevant to the big picture. The big picture is this, that you need more official CrossFit events happening throughout the year, so the fans can follow, the athletes have opportunities, and I believe it will just make the season a lot better. And I don't really see any reason as to why that can't happen.
No, me neither. I agree entirely. You see it in most other sports, right? You just have the grand finale at the end, and then you just have points building up, and then you give the games triple the points. And it's not because you win the games that you win the season. Maybe you have won all the competitions and before, and then you get sick during the games, but still win the overall yearly prize, right? I mean, it's not that strange, and yeah, there must be some reasons why this is not happening. It can only be good for the sport, in my opinion. Do you think that that CrossFit should be Olympic eventually?
I don't think CrossFit would be good Olympic sport, actually, because of the variance. So here's I've had conversations with functional fitness, but this kind of conversation can go like a bit of two ways. So one thing I think, just finishing off the CrossFit season, is that one important point is that these events don't have to be beatdowns every weekend.
Yep.
You know, I think it'd be really exciting to see, you know, this group of athletes travel to America. They compete in America for a weekend of, you know, kind of semi-final volume.
Yep.
The next month they're going to be in Africa. Then they're going to be in Asia. It just kind of creates this epic world tour where, you know, some athletes dip in, dip out, but it would just have a great storyline throughout the year. And then you have this pinnacle event, which is the games, which is high volume. You know, obviously the winner of the games holds a lot of prestige. But as you say, actually someone might have accumulated enough points in the build up to that where they can go through.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really sensible idea. I don't know if lots of people actually, as you know, in the world of CrossFit, see that as well, that the season needs to be expanded. But I don't know if we'll see how not.
Never get it, yeah.
Yeah. It in regards to the Olympics. So there's this functional fitness world, which I'm not like a huge fan of. I think it's, you know, anyway. I think what they should do is standardize the events.
Yep.
So they've tried to, you know, define things into various categories. I believe the trouble is what they've done is they've just copied CrossFit, but then in this weird way where they've kind of tried to make it a gymnastics event, tried to make it a power event or whatever it may be. And you've just got this weird mix of trying to compartmentalize, but then not really having compartmentalized. And so you end up in this weird space. And I actually think it'd be really interesting if you defined a set of 5 workouts. You know, you choose your power, you choose your gymnastics, and you just leave them, like Hyrox has done. Just leave the 5 workouts, don't touch them. And then I think something like that would be really interesting for the Olympics, because you standardized it. You know, arguably the athlete who's good at all 5 of these disciplines is going to be pretty epic in CrossFit, as you know, would have a high potential to do well at the games. Then athletes you could get like world records for, you know, say the power event. Let's just pick something random, but maybe you do like 30 clean and jerks into 30 calorie echo bike, and that's like your standard power event. And then you've got a gymnastics event that's predefined, and that's, I think something like that submitted into the Olympics could be really interesting, because you can build up data. It's, you know, standardized, so it's easy to follow. You could really iron out all of the details before it got to the big stage. Whereas, you know, imagine rocking up to the Olympics, Castro's like, I don't know, I just choose this random event for Castro to do. I don't know what they're doing, like pegboards and crossovers, or, you know, it'd just be, I just really struggled to see that it being pulled off in in a good way for the sport.
I mean, obviously what appeals to the games is that it is variable, and all of a sudden you have these crazy movements, right? I think for a CrossFit spectator it could be interesting, but I agree, the Olympics, I mean, it can perfectly exist in parallel. It can be, I mean, obviously it's every 4 years, so you just have those movements during those 4 years at like one time, and that's it. And maybe once or twice a year you also have a competition that has the Olympic CrossFit movements, but then you can just keep CrossFit how it is, constantly varied movements under high intensity that are just completely random, you know. I don't think it has to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be that CrossFit now all of a sudden has to be those 5 specific events. You can still be random, I guess.
I think one of the things I found really interesting to follow is Hyrox.
Yeah, I saw you guys are dabbling your toes a little bit into the Hyrox space. It's definitely interesting. I haven't looked too much into it. A couple of events. It's definitely interesting.
Yeah, the thing that's fascinated me is how successful they've been.
That's
like, they are
usually good, yeah.
Yeah, just phenomenal. Like, there were certain things we tried to book into a race in Spain this year. You know, we're only in we looked in January, and everything was sold out. We couldn't actually go to a race in Spain because every single slot for Hyrox, I think they've got four events in Spain this year, all sold out. And I was like, wow. And they've just done what people were asking CrossFit to do for years, which is just create a standardized event that people can go to and compete at, right? Yeah. You know, I think that it's a participatory event. I don't know how interesting the sport will be or become, But, I'm sure people could have said that about running, like,
I agree entirely. I agree.
like people, I think that like going to a marathon, you get tens of thousands of people sign up, and I'm not sure most people will even know who wins the race or whatever they do, but they're just there to kind of have a good time. And then you have these kind of um, like people at the peak of the sport who are very interested and involved in those things. But I think Hyrox has that kind of potential to really reach a large number of people. And all they did was standardize a long CrossFit workout, basically.
Yeah, exactly. What was interesting when I saw it on YouTube the other day is that the average athlete that is very good at Hyrox is actually tall, right? They're tall and relatively muscular. They have a different anthropometrics than CrossFit. So obviously the sport weeds out those people, and it's interesting from a physiology point of view that yeah, those kind of athletes are obviously different.
Like Hunter, for example, is like who's the world record holder and obviously been a bit of the face of the sport. He's like 90 kilos, which when you've got to run 8K, you definitely wouldn't pick a 90-kilo guy to be the one who's best at that. But as you say, this kind of coupling, this is the thing with the nuances of sports. It creates these, these weird people just excel at it. Like you got to say, like, especially when you go out to something like football, like just how exceptional someone like Messi or Ronaldo are doing what they do. I watched this. I mean, this is off topic of CrossFit, but I remember watching this documentary, and it was about Ronaldo heading a football into a goal. And what they did, they had a machine that threw out the football, and then the lights would go off, so he couldn't see anything. And they did it with like a normal person. Obviously, like as soon as that split second of the light going off, the person had no hope. This was like an average football player, had no hope of heading the ball. Ronaldo got to like basically as soon as the ball came out, they could turn the lights off and he'd head it into the goal. Just because from watching the ball for that split second, he knew the trajectory and how high he had to jump and all of these things. I mean, like the specialists, we become so specialized in these little details. And when they become applicable to something like a sport, we do really well. Like this Hunter guy, he wasn't great at CrossFit, wasn't great at running, but for whatever reason, he's epic at Hyrox because there's this weird world where it really works for him.
Yeah, this does remind me a bit of CrossFit. I mean, I had an interview also with Jelle Hoste. Obviously, you know him well, CrossFit Games athlete from Belgium, and he said a similar thing that he was talking with Pat Vellner and a couple of other guys, and they were jokingly saying that actually they failed in their own sport and then they become elite in CrossFit, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting that you don't, as a hybrid athlete where you are good at strength and endurance, maybe there's a special gift to be good at both, right? Like, that it's better than the sum of the two, maybe. And that is something that is definitely highly interesting because, you see he came from judo, he did really well in judo, but not getting to the highest level. And then, he picks up CrossFit and 4 years later he's at the games. I mean, it's crazy. He does CrossFit less amount of years than me, So it's fascinating, and there's not much to learn from a coaching perspective, but definitely also from a exercise sciences perspective, and hopefully we can get there once to have a little bit more detailed look at this, and maybe as you said, that when the sport becomes more professional, more less rogue, and maybe even Olympic, there would be much more money also for science to look at this, and that would be great in my opinion, because it's such an interesting sport from many points of view.
And I think especially like being able to understand why someone is like hyper responder to this. Why can someone handle so much volume?
Yeah.
What is it that makes this person just able to handle whatever you throw at them and respond to it is I think something really interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and it could also. Yeah, that's kind of also my idea. I'm interested from a scientific point of view in muscle memory, right? So if you kind of what you said, so like Tia, for example, I mean, it's not that she didn't do anything, but you have a 5 month or 8 month period where you have relative inactivity due to injury or so on. You come back as an athlete, like in 1 month, you're almost back at your PRs and back. I saw also an Instagram story from Jan Matjaska. He also had a quite severe injury, and he was now at a weightlifting camp and said that he actually was hitting most of his PRs. And he had like a strong injury coming from doing snatches with an empty bar, you know. So there's a strong level of muscle or cellular muscle memory, and it would be highly interesting from a scientific and biological point of view to know which genes are responsible and which gene clusters are responsible for this hyperactivity towards exercise when you come back. Because then maybe we can make people who are not high responders to exercise more responsive with maybe pharmacological agents or maybe even natural agents and so on. That instead of having to do 6 times a week CrossFit to get a certain longevity effect, maybe you have to do it 1 time a week, or maybe just go for a walk around the park, you see? So that's how maybe we can improve human health, because only exercise will be difficult.
I've had a few people reach out to me lately about this enhanced games. Obviously it had some like big backers with like Peter Thiel and the world's elite kind of backing this idea. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it as well. And also, one thing that's interesting is like, you know, say let's take Fraser for example. They've called him like completely natural, just high responder to all these things. You know, even if you drugged up most of the other field, would they be anywhere close to be able to still touch him? So one thing I'm kind of interested to see, like some of these high responders, for example, in weightlifting and all of these things, will they be able to outlift even in the natural Olympics? Kind of, there's just like an interesting thought process in this.
I think you would. So I don't know. Let's say you have a complete natural weightlifter, right? And he's hyper responder and he hits the world records. Natural. If you would then give him or her specific PEDs to even enhance his or her performance more, maybe indeed the marginal gain will be very low. But I do think that you will spread, or you will make the field much more broad. You will have suboptimal athletes getting towards the top because of enhanced muscle mass and so on, right? So, I mean, there are genes, for example, like myostatin, that if you knock that one out naturally or even via CRISPR-Cas in cows, their muscle growth doesn't stop, basically, right? So they have they're massive bulls, right? So I guess this is also possible in humans. And I guess then snatches will go higher than what you see now.
Isn't there the German velodrome rider who has
love this guy. What's his name again? I know what you mean.
But the quads for days.
But it's actually a disease, you know, like it's if kids or babies are born, you see this, that their thighs are already getting very wide, and they die early. It's obviously something you don't want. But and I was speaking about one specific gene, and it's also not that they would have more muscle strength, by the way, because it becomes dystrophic. But there are genes that are related to muscle strength, and also some proteins that I have looked at. And indeed, if you could enhance them and improve them with drugs, I guess you do get better athletes. And I mean, to get my idea about it, I haven't really thought too much about it, because I thought it would be a marginal idea, but apparently it's not a marginal idea, and it will be backed by some big funding. So it might be a good idea to think about it. What I think, I'm completely against it if they do some kind of health check, which you can do, right? For example, you can see that the person's hematocrit values are not getting towards 65, because then they will get a heart attack because of just the viscosity of the blood. And this is something you have to look for, because you don't want to kill people, literally. With like drugs that increase your muscle mass, it might be a bit more difficult, but I mean, to enhance endurance performance, you do have dangers there. But if you keep those in check, for example, you say you can do whatever you want, but your hematocrit cannot go higher than 55. I don't know. Might be fun to watch for sure. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to think about it yet. I don't know how you look at it.
I think it's when you take it to. I've always been quite clear, like the rules say this.
Yeah.
So it's like we stick in the rules, and that drugs fit into the same way of like cheating with weight on a barbell. It's like the rules say this, so we stick to the rules because those rules are sport. And someone like strongman, for example, you go, okay, well, those guys, obviously, I don't think strongman would be interesting to watch relatively if all of a sudden you started drug testing there.
Yeah. Sorry.
Are you still there, Goma?
Yeah, I'm still there. Coming up.
And so I'm then, I have no idea how it will present itself. It ends up in this kind of weird world of like ethical debates and all these things. But a part of me is interested to see just like the capabilities of the human body. I mean, being able to see what some of the strongmen have been able to lift and achieve is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder the same thing of these, these enhanced games. And what is the human body capable of being enhanced in this way? But it opens up this kind of like whole interesting debate.
That's a super interesting debate, and maybe we can finish it here. But then you need some kind of if you look at it from a CrossFit point of view, you would have to incorporate some kind of as you mentioned, some kind of tests that everyone does, some standardized tests, correct? Otherwise, yeah, I mean, if you look at the performance of the games throughout the years, it's hard to put into numbers if the athletes actually got better. Yes, in some points, yes, they do lift a bit more weight, but it's still hard, right? With Hyrox, it's much easier, I guess. You just know the times, they get better and whatever. And this would be quite useful to have some kind of grace slash 30 calories on the bike test and so on to see indeed where people are capable of. That would be super cool.
Yeah, because really we only have weights that are like the consistent objective measure through CrossFit. It's the repeated workouts often have some variance. They either get heavier or 2 rounds or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So I think that is interesting. And the courses that they run always tend to be different. Yeah. So it's like really this is why I think weightlifting has become so popular and such a measure is because it's really the only thing we can truly measure throughout the history of the sport.
Yeah, super interesting. Thanks for your thoughts. Still addicted to golf, John. I see your hat.
Yeah, I'm representing my my club brand. I still love golf. For me, golf. Obviously, there's not the physical component that you feel from CrossFit in the same way. There's just something about that focus of like committing to the shots each time, and there is that response of when you hit a great shot. Just that feeling that you kind of search for. So I'm enjoying golf. I'd like to play more. So hopefully, as the summer comes, I'll be able to get back into it more.
Same for me. I would love to play a bit more, but kids have to be a bit bigger, I think.
Yeah. So I do love golf, and I think there's lots of interesting debates happening in golf. And one, the hope is that the GOAT of all sports, Tiger Woods, comes back this season because I think that's what everyone would like to see. But then also this kind of live PGA. I think it's been really interesting to follow for being involved in smaller sport CrossFit to see it play out and to see where it's kind of going to end up.
Imagine that some kind of shake comes with that amount of money to the sport of CrossFit, man.
I don't think you're alone in hoping that may happen. I mean, it would be great. I think you could do, because as we kind of said, I think that there's so many cool things you could do with the sport and help to reach like a lot of people. Obviously it needs. Say that again.
Dahlstrøm 60 million for a contract of 2 years just to play in their league.
That's it. Come out to Saudi, play in the Saudi fitness league.
That's crazy. Yeah. I also saw, maybe to finish on this, later on, there's a live stream of the whole YouTube gang in golf. That
Yeah, the good.
a big live stream, which is pretty crazy. So now they have like a whole truck that will do a live stream of them playing golf, free on YouTube. So this is also big time booming, and it's cool to see how human creation and also with a maybe a boring sport, you can also catch a lot of people that are sub 30 years old. You know, everyone who's below 30 doesn't watch normal golf anymore, and they do maybe on YouTube, and it's cool to watch, and these guys are doing some phenomenal jobs and having a lot of eyeballs for sure.
I think it's also interesting to see but with the new
Yeah.
Apple headsets of following sport in that way as well. It's
Yeah.
more immersive version of being able to follow what these guys are doing and make it a bit more. I know the NFL have introduced it in a relatively big way.
Yeah. All right, John. I'll have to end it there. It's already, I think, an hour or so. So we'll keep it there.
We'll have, if anyone's still listening, they've done a good job.
Please comment below, and if you're still there, I mean, you're a legend for sure.
Yeah.
No, but I think the conversation was very interesting, at least for me. Yeah. Then for me, there's nothing more to add. Bye, John.
Bye bye.